Hello, I'm Ciarán Kelly, Deputy Director here at the Christian Institute. With me are my colleagues Simon Calvert and Dave Greatorex, and we're going to be taking a brief look at what's coming up on certain key issues in 2023 and how we and you can continue to be a Christian influence in a secular world. As always, in some areas we have a good deal of certainty. On other issues, they're much less clear, but we rejoice in the knowledge that God not only knows the future, but is sovereign over it. Simon, Dave, thanks. Simon, can we start with conversion therapy, because we give thanks to God the fact that the opinion from Aidan O'Neill has had a lot of great coverage, but there's a long journey on this. So just talk us through that.
Yeah, so we took legal advice from Aidan O'Neill, KC. People might remember him as the lawyer who we worked with on the named person case up to the Supreme Court, and who was involved in the Ashes case early on. So we asked him to look at the proposals that have been put to the Scottish Government by their own advisory group, and he gave us a very strong opinion about how damaging those proposals would be to basic freedoms and how they were outside actually the competence of the Scottish Parliament because they were so bad, and because they interfere with discrimination law across the UK, not just in Scotland. So we issued a press release about that before Christmas, and there wasn't much pickup. And given that you've got, one of the country's leading KCs slamming proposals from the Scottish Government, you would have expected there to be a bit more interest. So we kept on praying, and thankfully, a leading Scottish blogger did a blog where he looked at Aidan O'Neill's opinion, looked at the proposals, and he was as outraged as he ought to be. And that went viral on Twitter. And so we responded very quickly, reissued our press release, and sure enough, got loads of coverage. And so it just shows journalists read Twitter, and we were able to secure press coverage in virtually all of the Scottish newspapers and some of the broadcast outlets as well.
And the time is significant because there's a consultation, we don't know precisely when, but perhaps the end of this month, maybe the start of next month. Not 100% sure, but the Scottish Government are going to be consulting on this, aren't they?
That's right, yeah. They've said they're going to issue a consultation this month or next month, and they're looking at bringing forward a bill before the end of this year. So 2023, there's going to be a big focus in Scotland on trying to help the Scottish Government and civil servants and MSPs to understand that you can protect gay and trans people from physical and verbal abuse without wiping out freedom of speech. So that's going to be our goal for 2023.
Well, let's just stick briefly on this topic. What about Westminster? What about Northern Ireland? So there's been discussion in both those areas about conversion therapy bans. We've issued notice of potential legal action if they cross the threshold of what is going to affect religious liberty. What's the current situation in those areas? Yeah,
so we are lined up to take legal action in Northern Ireland and England, as well as in Scotland. In England, the Westminster Parliament, or rather the Westminster Government, they're still thinking about how they're going to legislate for conversion therapy. They know that it's very difficult territory, and so it continues to be delayed as they try to navigate a path through this very tricky issue. In Northern Ireland, of course, the devolved institutions are suspended, but we think that civil servants are still working behind the scenes on legislation so that when the institutions are up and running again, I think we could see a conversion therapy bill pretty quickly.
And actually, as the Republic of Ireland in the last few weeks have said that a minister there has said that they should look at having a conversion therapy ban as well.
Yes.
Just flipping back to Scotland briefly, the good news around conversion therapy in terms of the publicity and the coverage and the pushback on it comes hot on the heels of really quite a terrible change in the law in Scotland on gender recognition reform. So what's the lie of the land for this year on that?
Well, that's a little bit unclear because we're expecting the Westminster Government, or there's certainly a lot of media coverage at the moment about whether the Westminster Government will intervene because of the UK-wide implications, or certainly GB-wide implications of that legislation. Reports in the press today that even if you were to have a Scottish gender recognition certificate, you would have to apply for a separate one for it to be valid in England, which creates this strange system within the British Isles. And certainly the government is looking at the impact on the Equality Act as well, and other legislation that is reserved to Westminster. And they have the power, should they choose, to stop the presiding officer sending the Scottish bill for royal assent, meaning it wouldn't be able to become law. That itself would be a decision that could be challenged by judicial review, which the Scottish Government would no doubt expect to do. So I think we can expect that legislation, or it seems likely to me that legislation will end up before the courts in one form or another.
Right, we're still in January, but just to change subjects, the online safety bill, we had lots of good news on that towards the back end of last year, lots of positive changes being made by the government. We had campaigned for them, we welcome them, we're very pleased about them. But that could be in the House of Lords as early as February. And there is the potential for some of those good changes to be watered down.
That's right, we're seeing certainly plenty in the media, particularly peers, Labour peers, who are upset about the changes the government has made. They're using strong rhetorical language around the issue. They're claiming it gives a green light to abusers and language like that, which we don't think is at all a valid description of what the government has done. The government is still emphasising the importance of this bill protecting children, and if anything, it's strengthened the bill with regard to children and focused the legislation more on children, which is what we all want to see. And we think the free speech protections have introduced are essential, really. And without those, it compromises the bill as a whole. It damages how it will be received and I think how it will work. So it's far better in its current form. It's still to be finalised by the Commons. We're expecting that to take place in the middle of January. And then, as you say, it'll go to the Lords and we'll have to see what peers there seek to do.
And assisted suicide, again, is another very current issue. There was consultations of some form or another. Westminster, there's the bill in Scotland, there's consultations in Jersey and the Isle of Man. It seems that we're suddenly racing on a number of fronts to look at, or perhaps look at bringing in softer laws on assisted suicide again, even though there's been voted down multiple times. This is a very current topic. It's another issue we want to be really on top of, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a really live concern. I mean, supporters will have been hearing from us in recent weeks about various consultations in different parts of the British Isles, and it is a real concern. If any part of the British Isles goes down this route, it creates huge pressure for other parts to do the same. You've got the potential for tourism, assisted suicide tourism to different parts of the British Isles. So yeah, it's so important that we seek to respond in the strongest possible terms to any proposals in any part of our country.
And what's interesting is the way that the reality of assisted suicide and euthanasia in Canada is now coming to light.
Yeah,
there's
lots
a lot
of coverage on that.
Yeah, a lot of media coverage of how their laws there are leading to people who are not terminally ill, not in pain, being offered and taking up euthanasia. And
fear of homelessness, fear of
poverty,
not making ends meet.
And so what you're seeing is journalists who are not sympathetic with our starting point on assisted suicide saying, hang about, this is terrible. This is not what we thought assisted suicide meant. And of course, from our perspective, we're saying, well, we said this all along. The slippery slope argument is much maligned, but sometimes the slope really is slippery. And right. Canada, initially they had safeguards, so-called safeguards in that legislation, so that it only applied to people who are terminally ill.
2016?
Yeah, they introduced it in 2016, that's right. And already they've removed at least a couple of those safeguards, so-called, that were introduced. So it just shows how quickly it can happen once you take away the principle.
And so people who are mentally ill can be euthanized or can commit suicide with help from doctors.
I was reading something today where someone was saying, don't. I'm going to say it's physical, but really it's mental. Yeah, it's a mental problem.
Yeah. They say what they think they need to say to kind of get past the threshold and to get the assisted suicide. But again, from our perspective, we would say, well, once you decide that some people's lives aren't worth living, it's natural that that category just gets wider and wider and wider, and that's why you must never open the door to assisted suicide in the first place.
I think one of the pieces you might have been referring to of a professed liberal on this, Sonia Soda, had a really good piece as an opinion piece in The Guardian recently, I forget when, but in the last couple of weeks. I was also just reading at the back end of last week, I think it was a letter in the Times, palliative care experts, one or two others, I think, were making this point about Canada, but they were pointing out that this used to be held up as this wonderful place of people like Dignity and Dying were sort of saying, let's follow the Canada route. And now they've gone very quiet on it because Canada is getting, thankfully, a lot of negative publicity about this.
Yeah, that's right. But they can't change course now. I mean, they've thoroughly hitched their wagon to the Canadian model. Canada shows what really happens. But one of the things they do is they say, oh, don't look over here at Canada, look over here at the state of Oregon. But, we are beginning to see similar stories emerging from there as well. But this is one of the techniques that people use. They point to something overseas where over here we just don't have the information normally about what is really happening there. And so we've only got their account of it. Once the reality starts to kind of unravel, they say, oh, no, we don't really mean that. Actually, the conversion therapy is perhaps a similar example, because the model that gets upheld here...
State of Victoria in
State of Victoria, right. But when we were highlighting that the guidance there says parents who don't consent to their children going on puberty blockers are being told that that's unlawful conversion therapy, then some of the activists start to say, oh, no, don't look at that, look at this. But we have to hold their feet to the fire and say, no, this is what you said you thought we should do, and this is the reality of what that means in practice.
Children potentially being taken away from their parents. I mean,
in Scotland,
shocking.
We're back to talking about conversion therapy. Yes, the so-called expert advisory group that the Scottish government commissioned specifically recommended that we consider removing parental rights from parents who breach the new offence. And if conversion therapy meant physically or verbally abusing people, that would be different. But it clearly doesn't. It clearly just means not affirming kids in.
Just getting back to assisted suicide briefly, just in terms of sort of the timeline over this year, I think I'm right in saying Jersey are furthest down the tracks in terms of the progress that they've made, but Scotland isn't terribly far behind, and the MacArthur bill there, that could very well see the light of day this year. Westminster a bit further behind as well, isn't that right? So,
yeah, and the Westminster consultation is quite open-ended. It doesn't have a particular objective in mind. It seems to be looking at the issue very much in the abstract. The MacArthur bill in Scotland is very much aimed at introducing assisted suicide. We're expecting to see that probably this month, and it would certainly then be expected in the ordinary course of events to get through this year, unless MSPs were to oppose it. We know that the last attempt in Scotland in 2015 was rejected by a significant majority,
margin,
but this is a whole new parliament. MSPs, a very different collection of MSPs now, so they all need to be persuaded of the dangers, the scenarios of Canada to be explained to them. They need to be shown the dangers of the law. Jersey has already, in principle, the legislature there has in principle agreed it. So the consultation in Jersey is much more about how it should be done rather than whether it should be done.
And the Isle of Man one is pretty much along those lines as well.
Yes, it is. That's right.
Yeah. Just the last of these sort of in the right here and now issues I want to pick up on is the issue of censorship zones. So I spoke just before Christmas to Isabel Vaughan Spruce. She was the lady people would be familiar with who works for March for Life UK and was arrested for standing near a closed abortion clinic, as in it wasn't open for business at the time she was there. And some of the time she was there, she may have been praying in her head. And she was arrested for this, which is a shocking case. Don't want to talk too much about that. I just want to talk about the direction of travel on them. We've seen Ealing, Fallowfield and Manchester, one or two in Scotland. There's been local censorship zones being put in place, but there has been movement towards national zones as well, hasn't there?
That's right, and there was a backbench amendment to the Public Order Bill that was accepted. That was a Stella Creasy, a Labour MP's amendment. Was accepted, I think, back in October. And the public order bill is moving now through the House of Lords. The government has actually said, so every bill has a declaration on the front of it from the minister saying, I believe this is compliant with human rights legislation. And the minister said, because of the new clause, which is currently clause 9 of the bill, he said he wasn't able to make that declaration. So the bill as it stands, because of that clause, is not compliant with human rights legislation.
Is that unusual?
Very unusual. I don't remember seeing it.
I can think of one other example. You've got to go back 20 years for it.
Well, before my time. Very rare for that to happen. What the government has said, though, is that it accepts the will of the House of Commons to insert that, and so they're going to work to find a solution that will be human rights compliant, and so will lead to national zones, censorship zones outside abortion clinics.
Okay, well, I want to get away from in the sort of more certain areas into slightly more murkier territory. We're not too far away from the next general election, bizarre though that may sound. And we're already starting to see a little bit of jockeying for position in terms of policies on various things. Now, obviously, people will be understandably particularly interested about the economy. We're not going to get into that. But what sort of things can we see transpiring on our issues over the next, let's say, 18 months as the parties look to line themselves up ahead of an election?
Well, we've already established that Labour's position on the online safety bill is to undo those improvements on free speech. And so, we've got to win the argument yet with the Labour front bench on that. I think on the issue of conversion therapy at Westminster, based on what the government ministers and shadow ministers have said from the front bench, the positions aren't very far apart. The Labour and the Conservatives both want a conversion therapy ban, but they both recognise that you have to protect freedom of speech, freedom of religion. Quite where they would draw the line, we have to see.
Keir Starmer got quite a lot of criticism for being incredibly vague over what constituted a woman. I think some of his front bench team got similar sort of criticism. Is there any difference between sort of differences in the front bench positions on, a woman is defined by biological sex, a man is defined by biological sex, not by self-identification?
Yeah, I think people will have heard Conservative government ministers saying some fairly emphatic things that a woman is a woman, whereas, as you say, there was a time where Keir Starmer was pretty vague on that. But then, on the other hand, both the government and Keir Starmer have said that when it comes to children transitioning, that parents should have a say. Mm-hmm. And in fact, Keir Starmer got some pushback from trans activists for saying that. So there isn't always clear blue water between Labour and the Conservatives on these issues.
That's right.
And people will be aware that we produce, in the run-up to an election, we produce an election guide. Dave and his team put a lot of work into making sure that that is absolutely accurate in terms of the best available information that we have at the time. Obviously, it's quite a way out yet, but when the time comes, we will produce one of those for the next election, as we have done in the past. Okay, just let's think about just some of the things to watch out for, if you like, this year. Not the things that we've already spoken about. There's a culture, media, sport inquiry into gambling regulation that's happening in the next couple of months. What hope is there, Dave, would you say, of sort of a toughening up, hopefully, of gambling law, at least starting this year?
Yeah, it was a manifesto commitment back in 2019, and we've not really seen any substantial movement.
Yeah, they seem to keep getting to the point of there's going to be something, and then
a white paper has been expected for some time. It just seems to keep being kicked down the road. Obviously, there have been various changes in leadership and so on, but it's been discouraging to see to see the delays there. And also, in a lot of the coverage around the issue, there does seem to be a retreat from some of the things we were expecting. They were expecting a stronger clampdown in advertising than perhaps seems to be likely to happen, including within sport.
Yeah,
obviously, there's been a real sport washing thing done with gambling. That's right. So I suppose I find myself quite discouraged by the lack of progress and then the noises that are coming out. I mean, it was 2005 was the Gambling Act, which was the Blair government at the time seeking, I think, to make the UK a world lead really in for the gambling industry, and they've been pretty successful in that, and we're bearing the results of that now.
It's a different world now, of course, with online
of course,
gambling as well. So in many ways,
and that's one of the factors in updating the gambling legislation is that it's really been overtaken by technology. That even as the Gambling Act was going through, nobody really expected internet gambling to be the thing that it is. Although we did certainly warn people that it would be. Yeah. But that just wasn't really foreseen, and now that is the dominant mode of gambling, really.
What about the Bill of Rights bill? It seemed to be a little bit hokey-cokey. It was happening, and then there was various changes at the top levels of government. It was out of favour, it was back in. I think out of favour again at the moment. What's going on with the Bill of Rights bill? Do we know?
Well, so yes, as you say, the bill was a commitment of the government, and then Liz Truss took office and the bill was dead in the water, and then we have Rishi Sunak and the bill appeared to be resurrected. Now the position is that the Prime Minister said just before Christmas that the bill would be progressed in Parliament, but that there isn't a date for it. It's complicated because there are other issues at play which aren't Christian Institute issues. And so that bill plays a lot into the issue of immigration.
Just remind everybody why the Christian Institute should be interested in it at all.
Yeah, so we're worried about the Bill of Rights because it rewrites some of the human rights provisions which we have used successfully in some of our court cases. Now, we think that even if they amended it as proposed, we could still win our cases. Yes, cases like Ashes, cases like named person. But why take the risk? And so, so those are our concerns. They're to do with religious freedom. But there are other issues in play to do with immigration. It may be that the government takes steps in other areas of legislation to tackle its concerns about immigration, which further reduce the political imperative to bring forward this Bill of Rights. But, we just don't know. We're just going to have to wait and see, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the impression that's been given is that the bill is quite tied to the fortunes of Dominic Raab. So, when he was in previously under Johnson, then the bill was on the table, and then he was removed by Truss, and then it wasn't on the table, and then he was brought back by Sunak, and it was back on the table again. So, yeah, it's tied quite closely to him, I think. So we'll have to watch this space.
Okay. Last thing, but by no means least, Northern Ireland obviously it's a case apart in the sense of the executive isn't there and so on. But we have been concerned and are still concerned about the potential for some pretty bad changes in hate crime over in Northern Ireland. Let's assume that the executive starts operating again in, let's say, the next 3 months. Can we expect to see some of those changes start to move forward? What do we think?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the next stage we're expecting is phase 2 of a consultation. So there was a consultation on some aspects of the recommendations from the Independent Hate Crime Review, the Marinan Review, but not others. And so I think the next stage will probably be another round of consultation.
Is there anything else that you think, looking ahead to 2023, that you think supporters ought to be conscious of?
Well, we are still looking to see how the bans on smacking in Scotland and Northern Ireland are working out in practice. We're not yet in possession of facts and figures on prosecutions, so I think we're going to have to wait and see in terms of how that's really working on the ground.
Shouts to ban it in England and shouts to ban it in they crop up every so often, don't they?
Yes. I think there will be, once the Northern Ireland institutions are up and running, there'll be another push to ban smacking there. And then, yes, we could see an attempt to criminalise smacking at the Westminster Parliament as well for England. So that's always potentially a live issue.
Okay, well, as you can see, the Christian Institute has got an awful lot on. We've not covered everything. We've not covered all the issues that the Institute deals with, but hopefully that will give our supporters a sense of the level of work that we have on and the breadth of issues. Thanks for taking the time to talk about it. Okay. As ever, schools remain on our radar. Our Salt and Light in Education meetings, they continue through into March. On the broader issue of biblical worldview, if you've not yet run a Living Christianity course, then think about that. Thousands of you already have, which is great. And of course, there's the brand new free youth version that's been out since September. Hundreds of people already watching that. You'll find both of those at livingchristianity.org.uk. And of course, there's our regular church meetings. If you're not familiar with those, sign up. We use your postcode to let you know of meetings in your area. Before you go, don't forget to like and share on our YouTube channel and to follow us on socials. Thanks for watching.